They say that time heals all wounds. But I don't think that's true. Some wounds don't heal. They scar over, a thick, protective layer of tissue that hides the damage beneath. My scar is 15 years old. It's the shape of the front door of my childhood home. The door my own father threw me out of when I was 17 years old, pregnant, and terrified. He thought he was throwing away a shameful secret. He had no idea that one day, he'd be knocking on my door, begging for that same secret to save his life. If you've ever had to build a new family out of the ashes of your old one, then you're going to feel this in your bones. My life now, on the surface, is a portrait of success. I am Juliana Hayes, a respected architect with my own small, successful firm. I live in a beautiful, light-filled modern home that I designed myself. A place of clean lines, warm woods, and floor-to-ceiling windows that look out onto a quiet, peaceful garden. It is my sanctuary. The center of that sanctuary, my entire universe, is my son. Leo? He is 15 years old, a brilliant, funny, and deeply kind young man with my eyes and a mind that is far sharper than mine ever was. He's a coding genius who builds robots in our garage for fun. He's the first person I talk to in the morning and the last person I say goodnight to. Our life together is quiet, happy, and built on a foundation of mutual respect and unconditional love. He is my greatest achievement, my proudest creation. He is also the secret that cost me my entire family. 15 years ago, I was not a successful architect. I was a terrified 17-year-old girl, sitting in the formal, suffocating living room of my parents' house, about to tell them a truth that would shatter their perfect world. My parents were, and I assume still are, pillars of their conservative, wealthy community. My father was a successful investment banker, a man whose entire identity was built on pride, control, and the immaculate public image of his family. My mother was his loyal, socialite wife, a woman who valued what the neighbors thought more than what her own daughter felt. They had a perfect son, my older brother Mark, who was already at a prestigious university, following in my father's footsteps. And they had me, the daughter who was about to bring shame and disgrace to their perfect family name. I can still remember the silence after I whispered the words, "I'm pregnant." My mother began to weep. But her tears were not for me. They were for her. "What will people say?" she cried, her hands fluttering at her pearl necklace. "What will we tell everyone at the country club? Our reputation will be ruined." My father, however, was not sad. He was furious. He looked at me, not with the compassion of a father, but with the cold, hard eyes of a man whose prized possession has just been irreparably damaged. "Who is the father?" he demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "It doesn't matter," I whispered. "He's not in the picture." "I see," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "So you were not only careless, but you were foolish." He stood up and began to pace the room, a caged tiger of pride and fury. He didn't ask me how I was feeling. He didn't ask me if I was scared. He just laid out his terms, the ultimatum. "You will deal with this problem," he said, his voice cold and final. "You will terminate this situation, and we will never speak of it again. You will go on to college. You will get married to a suitable young man, and you will erase this disgusting mistake." I looked at him, at this man who was supposed to love me unconditionally, and I found a strength I never knew I possessed. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "What did you say?" he roared. "I said no," I repeated, standing up to face him. "I am not going to deal with this problem. This is my child, and I am going to have it." The look on his face is a memory that is seared into my soul. It was a look of pure, absolute revulsion. He walked over to the grand, heavy front door of our home and pulled it open. "Then you are no longer my daughter," he said, his voice as cold as the grave. "You have shamed this family. You have disgraced our name. If you choose this path, you are not welcome in this house. Get out." My mother just sat on the sofa, weeping into her hands, saying nothing. My brother, who had been listening from the hallway, just looked at me with a smirk of smug satisfaction. I was the problem child, and I had finally been dealt with. So I left, with nothing but a small bag of clothes and the few $100s I had saved from my part-time job. I walked out that front door and into a new, terrifying life. The 15 years that followed were hard, incredibly hard. I lived in a home for unwed mothers. I gave birth to my beautiful son, Leo, alone. I worked 2, sometimes 3, menial jobs at a time, cleaning houses and waiting tables, while I put myself through night classes at a community college. All the while, I was raising my son, my brilliant, beautiful boy, who was the one source of light in my dark, lonely world. My family never called, not once. They never checked to see if I was alive or dead. They had cut me out of their lives as cleanly and as efficiently as a surgeon removing a tumor. But I was resilient. I got my associate's degree. I transferred to a state university and got my degree in architecture. My long-dormant passion. I got a good job. I worked my way up. I built a life for myself and my son. A life of our own making, built on a foundation of hard work, love, and a fierce, protective independence. I never told Leo to be ashamed of his story. I told him the truth that he was a child born of love, and that his mother had chosen him over everything else. He was not a shameful secret. He was my greatest pride. And now, as I stood in the kitchen of the beautiful home I had earned, watching my 15-year-old son do his homework at the kitchen table, that old life, that family that had rejected me, felt like a distant, faded photograph, a chapter I had thought was closed forever. But the past has a funny way of showing up unannounced, and my family, the family that had thrown me out into the cold 15 years ago, was about to find themselves in a desperate, terrible winter of their own. And they were about to come knocking on my door, looking for warmth. The 15 years that followed my exile were a testament to the quiet, stubborn power of a woman with nothing left to lose. I built a life, I built a home, I built a career, and most importantly, I built a family, a small, strong, and deeply loving family of 2, me and my son, Leo. I poured all the love that my own family had rejected into him, and he grew into a brilliant, kind, and wonderful young man. My family, the one that had cast me out, became ghosts. They were stories I told Leo, not of anger, but of a sad, distant past. They were faces in a single, faded photograph I kept in a box. I had accepted their absence. I had made my peace with it. I thought, moved on completely. And then, on a bright, sunny Saturday afternoon, the ghost showed up on my doorstep. Leo and I were in the kitchen, laughing as we tried to bake a ridiculously complicated cake for his robotics club bake sale. The doorbell rang. "I'll get it," he yelled, wiping a smear of flour from his cheek as he ran to the door. I heard the door open. I heard my son's cheerful hello, and then I heard a silence so sudden and so absolute that a cold dread snaked its way up my spine. I walked out of the kitchen and into the foyer, and my world stopped, standing on my porch, staring at my son with wide, shocked eyes, were 3 people I had not seen in 15 years. My father, my mother, and my brother, Mark. Time seemed to warp and bend. They were older, of course. My mother's perfectly coiffed hair now had streaks of silver, and there were fine lines of stress around her eyes. My brother, Mark, the golden boy, had lost some of his hair, and the arrogant smirk he used to wear had been replaced by a look of weary desperation. But it was my father who was the most changed. The powerful, furious, unbending man who had thrown me out of his house was gone. In his place stood a man who looked frail. He was thinner. His skin had a pale, sallow quality, and he seemed to be leaning on my mother for support. He looked old. He looked sick. They all just stared at Leo, at his tall, 15-year-old frame, at his dark, curly hair, at my eyes looking back at them from his face, and I could see the dawning, horrified recognition in their expressions. They didn't need me to tell them. They knew. The shameful secret I had been exiled for was standing right in front of them, a living, breathing testament to the life I had built without them. "Mom?" Leo asked, turning to me, his voice full of a sudden, quiet confusion. "Who are these people?" My voice, when it finally came, was a hoarse whisper I barely recognized. "Leo," I said, These are your grandparents and your uncle." The reunion I had both dreaded and, in some secret, foolish part of my heart, yearned for, was happening right here, on my doorstep. And it was nothing like I had imagined. There were no tears of joyful recognition. There was no heartfelt apology. There was just a thick, awkward, and deeply uncomfortable silence. Thick with 15 years of unspoken words. My mother was the first to find her voice, though it was a trembling, uncertain sound. "Juliana," she whispered, her eyes still fixed on Leo. It's really you." My brother Mark, ever the pragmatist, just looked past me, his eyes taking in the high ceilings, the modern art, the clean, elegant lines of the beautiful home I had designed and built for myself. He looked stunned. This was not the life he had imagined for his failure of a sister. "Can we come in, Juliana?" he finally said, his voice flat. "We need to talk to you. It's important." I was still in a state of shock, my mind reeling. 1,000 emotions were at war within me, the old, familiar rage, the deep, aching hurt, and a new, strange, and unwelcome flicker of pity for the frail-looking old man on my porch, who was once my father. Without a word, I numbly stepped aside and let them in. I let the ghosts of my past walk into the sanctuary of my present. They stepped into my living room, looking completely out of place, 3 relics from a forgotten, painful era. They stared at my son, who was now looking at them with a mixture of curiosity and a fierce, protective loyalty to me. "So," I finally said, my voice cold and distant. The voice of a stranger. I crossed my arms over my chest, a physical shield against them. "After 15 years of silence, you show up at my door. What do you want?" It was clear they were not here for a happy reunion. They were not here to apologize. Their faces were etched with a desperation so profound it was a tangible thing in the room. My father opened his mouth to speak, but a wave of dizziness seemed to pass over him, and he swayed on his feet. My mother rushed to his side, helping him into an armchair. He looked so weak, so diminished. My mother looked at my brother, a silent command passing between them. Mark, the golden child, the successful lawyer, was to be their spokesperson. He cleared his throat, his usual arrogance completely gone, replaced by a nervous, desperate urgency. He couldn't quite meet my eyes. He stared at a point on the wall just over my shoulder. "Juliana," he began, his voice strained. We need your help." He took a deep, shaky breath. "It's Dad," he said. "He's dying." The words, "he's dying," hung in the air of my sunlit living room, a stark, brutal contrast to the peaceful life I had so carefully built. My brother, Mark, had delivered the line with a practiced, lawyerly gravity, but his eyes were filled with a desperate, terrified plea. My mother just wept silently into a handkerchief, and my father, the man who had been a towering, furious figure in my memory for 15 years, just sat in my armchair, looking small, gray, and utterly defeated. I just stared at them, my mind a blank, roaring void. My son, Leo, who had been watching this entire surreal scene unfold with a quiet, intelligent intensity, came to my side and slipped his hand into mine. His warm, steady grip was an anchor in the sudden, violent storm that had just descended upon my life. "What do you mean, dying?" I finally asked, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion that was churning inside me. It was my mother who answered, her voice a ragged, broken whisper. "It's leukemia," she said. "A very rare, very aggressive form, the chemotherapy. It isn't working. The doctors told us last week that he has maybe 6 months left. If that, his only hope," Mark added, his voice strained, "is a bone marrow transplant, but he needs a compatible donor, a perfect match." I understood now, the desperation, the unannounced visit after 15 years of silence. They had run out of options, and I was their last resort. "We've all been tested," my mother continued, her gaze finally meeting mine, her eyes full of a pleading shame. "Me, Mark, all your aunts, your uncles, your cousins. No one is a match, not even a partial one. Mark." She looked at her perfect son, the golden child. "He was our best hope, but he wasn't a match. My father, the man who had disowned me, who had cast me out for being a shameful mistake, finally spoke. His voice wasn't the booming roar I remembered. It was the frail, papery whisper of a sick old man. "Juliana," he began, his eyes full of a regret so profound it was almost a physical thing. I know I have no right. I have no right to be here. I have no right to ask you for anything. The last words I spoke to you were cruel and unforgivable. He took a deep, shuddering breath. But I don't want to die. He looked at me, his eyes swimming with tears. The doctors said that you, as my biological child, you are my last hope, my only hope. Please, Juliana, he begged. The proud patriarch now reduced to a broken, pleading child. I am begging you. Will you get tested? The request, so simple, so monumental, hung in the air between us. My mind was a chaotic storm. A part of me, the wounded 17-year-old girl, wanted to scream, wanted to laugh in his face. You want me to save your life? The life you decided I wasn't worthy of being a part of. You threw me out like a piece of trash. And now you want me to give you a piece of my own body so you can continue to live. The injustice of it was so profound, so absolute. It was almost comical. But then I looked at him. I really looked at him. The furious, unbending monster from my memories was gone. In his place was just a man, a scared, sick, and dying man who was my father, despite everything, despite the 15 years of silence, despite the deep, unhealed wound he had carved into my soul. A part of me, a deep, primal part, still loved him. And then I felt the gentle squeeze of my son's hand in mine. I looked down at Leo, my brilliant, beautiful son, the shameful secret who was now a testament to my own strength and resilience. He was looking at me, his expression full of a quiet, fierce, and unwavering love. His presence in that room, the living, breathing proof of the life I had built on my own, changed the entire equation. I was no longer that scared, 17-year-old girl, desperate for her father's approval. I was a 32-year-old woman, a successful architect, a mother. My decisions were no longer just about my own hurt, my own anger. They were about the kind of person I wanted to be in front of my son, the kind of lesson I wanted to teach him, a lesson about compassion, about forgiveness, about the complicated, messy, and often painful reality of what it means to be a family. I looked back at my father, at my mother, at my brother. They were watching me, their faces a mixture of hope and terror, waiting for my verdict. The power in the room, the power over life and death, was entirely in my hands. You show up here, I finally said, my voice shaking with the weight of 15 years of unspoken pain. After 15 years of absolute silence, after throwing me out of my own home, after leaving me to fend for myself, to build a life from the ashes of the one you burned down. And you ask me to save your life. I shook my head, a slow, disbelieving motion. You have no idea what you're asking of me. I saw the hope drain from their faces. They thought this was my refusal. I need to think, I said, my voice now firm. I need time to process this. You can't just reappear after 15 years and expect an immediate answer to a question like this. I stood up, a silent dismissal. You should go, I said. All of you. I have your number, Mark. I will call you when I have made my decision. They stood up, their movements slow, defeated. They looked like they wanted to say more, to plead their case further, but my expression, my cold, quiet calm, seemed to stop them. I walked them to the door. My father paused on the threshold and looked at me one last time. I am so sorry, Juliana, he whispered. I just nodded, my face a blank mask. I closed the door behind them, and I leaned against it, the full crushing weight of their request, of their reappearance, finally settling on me. I was left alone in my beautiful, sunlit home, with my son, the secret he represented, and the life of the very man who had rejected us both, now resting in my hands. The past had come crashing into my present, and now, I had to decide what I was willing to sacrifice for a future I had never imagined. The days following my family's reappearance were a quiet, personal hell. I was caught in a crossfire of conflicting emotions. There was the deep, primal anger of the 17-year-old girl they had thrown away, a part of me that wanted to scream. Let him suffer, let him feel the helplessness that I felt. But there was also the daughter, the one who remembered him teaching her to ride a bike, who looked at the frail, sick old man on her doorstep and felt an unwelcome pang of compassion. I talked it over with my son, Leo. I had always been honest with him about our past, and his emotional intelligence at 15 was already light years beyond my parents'. We sat on the sofa in my living room, the same room where my family had delivered their desperate plea just days before. "So," he said, his voice calm and thoughtful, "he kicked you out when you were pregnant with me, and now he's dying, and he needs you to save him." "That about sums it up," I said with a bitter laugh. "Are you going to do it?" he asked, not with judgment, but with a genuine, quiet curiosity. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice a whisper. "I honestly don't know. Leo?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Well," he finally said, "the guy sounds like a real jerk, but he's still my grandfather, I guess. And your dad?" He looked at me, his gaze full of a simple, profound wisdom. "What do you want to do?" His question cut through all the noise. It wasn't about what they deserved. It wasn't about revenge or forgiveness. It was about me. What kind of person did I want to be? Could I live with myself if I let my father die? When I held the potential to save him. After a week of agonizing deliberation, I knew the answer. I could not. My anger and my hurt were valid, but they were not more powerful than my fundamental belief in compassion. I would get tested, but I would do it on my own terms. I called my brother, Mark, and told him to bring my parents back to my house that evening. "I've made my decision," was all I said. They arrived looking nervous and full of a desperate, fragile hope. They thought I was going to tell them that I would agree to the testing. They thought I was going to give them the answer they wanted, that the good, responsible daughter had once again acquiesced. I let them sit on my sofa. I offered them water. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to sit in the uncomfortable space they had created. Finally, my father couldn't take it anymore. "So, Juliana," he asked, his voice a frail whisper, Have you decided, will you do it?" I took a deep breath. It was time to reveal the first of my secrets. "I don't have to get tested, Dad," I said, my voice calm and even. The hope in their eyes died instantly, replaced by a look of crushing despair. My mother let out a small, wounded gasp. They thought this was my refusal. They thought I was saying no. "I already have," I continued quietly. They just stared at me, confused. "What?" my mother asked. "I was tested years ago," I explained. "When Leo had a bad case of pneumonia when he was little, I got scared. I went to the hospital and joined the National Bone Marrow Registry, just in case he ever needed a transplant himself one day. They did a full tissue typing. I have the records." I paused, letting the weight of my next words land with a quiet, devastating finality. "And I know for a fact, and have known for years, that I am not a compatible match for you. My tissue type is completely different. I can't be your donor. I'm sorry." The despair that washed over the room was a tangible thing. It was absolute. My father seemed to shrink into his chair, a look of hollow resignation on his face. My mother started to weep. Quiet, hopeless sobs. My brother, Mark, just stared at me, his face a mask of furious disbelief. "So that's it," he finally spat, his voice full of a bitter anger. "It's over after all this. You can't even help him." "I can't be his donor," I said, repeating my words carefully. "That doesn't mean there aren't other options." "What other options?" my mother cried. "We've tested everyone, the entire family. There's no one left." I looked at her, at my father, at my brother. I let them sit in their hopelessness for a long, quiet moment. I let them feel the full weight of their desperation. Then I stood up. "You're right," I said. "You have tested everyone in the family that you know about." I looked at my father. "You're right, Mark. You're not a match. I'm not a match. But," I said, my voice dropping, "there is one other person in our direct bloodline, one other person who carries your DNA. Dad, one other person who might be a perfect match." They just stared at me, their faces a mixture of confusion and a dawning, wild hope. "What are you talking about?" my mother asked, her tears stopping. "There is no one else. Who are you talking about?" I didn't answer. I just turned and walked down the short hallway that led to Leo's bedroom, where he was doing his homework. I knocked softly on his door. Leo, honey. I called out. Can you come out to the living room for a minute? There are some people here I'd like you to meet. I walked back into the living room and stood beside the empty space next to me. A moment later, my son walked into the room, a confused but trusting look on his face. My family just stared at him, and in that moment, I knew I was about to change their world forever. My son, Leo, walked into the living room, a questioning look on his face. "Mom, you called," he asked, his eyes immediately going to the three strangers who were staring at him with a strange, intense mixture of shock and horror. He was tall for 15, with my dark, curly hair, but he had a jawline and a quiet, steady gaze that was pure Harrison. He was the living, breathing ghost of a past my family had tried to bury 15 years ago. I put a protective, proud arm around my son's shoulders. I looked at my family, at their pale, stunned faces, and I made the introduction that would shatter their world. "Mom, Dad, Mark," I began, my voice clear and unwavering. "I'd like you to meet my son, Leo." I paused, letting the words land with the force of a physical blow. "Your grandson, your nephew." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a carefully constructed reality imploding. My mother made a small, strangled sound, her hand flying to her mouth. My brother, Mark, just stared, his face a mask of disbelief, his eyes darting from my face to Leo's. The pieces of a puzzle he had never known existed clicking into place with a horrifying certainty. But it was my father's reaction that I will never forget. He stared at Leo, at this tall, handsome young man who was his own flesh and blood, a grandson he had never met, had never even known existed. And his face, which had been a mask of sick, weary despair, crumpled completely. A deep, ragged sob tore from his chest, a sound of a grief so profound it seemed to shake the very foundations of the room. This wasn't just the grief of a dying man. It was the grief of a man who was just now realizing what he had truly lost. 15 years ago, I said, my voice cutting through the silent, agonizing tension. "You threw me out of your house. You called me a disgrace. You told me I was a shameful secret that needed to be erased." I pulled my son closer to my side. "Well, this is my secret. This brilliant, wonderful, incredible young man. He is the problem you told me to deal with." And I did. I dealt with it by loving him, by raising him, by giving him the kind of unconditional love and support that I never got from you. I looked at my mother, whose face was now streaked with tears of what looked like genuine, dawning remorse. "You said there was no one left," I said. "You said I was your last hope." I shook my head. "You were wrong. I'm not a compatible match for Dad. I can't be his donor." I watched as the last, final sliver of hope died in their eyes. They thought this was my final, cruel act of revenge. But, I continued, my voice now a low, powerful whisper, "that doesn't mean there isn't hope." I looked from my father's broken face to my brother's stunned one. "You were tested, Mark, and you weren't a match. I was tested, and I'm not a match. But there is one other person in our direct bloodline. One other person who carries my father's DNA." I looked down at my son, my beautiful, secret son. "There is a 25% chance that his other direct biological descendant," I said, my voice ringing with a quiet, devastating triumph. "His only grandson is a perfect match." The implication of my words hung in the air, a stunning, absolute, and world-altering truth. Their only hope for survival, the key to their future, the potential savior of the family patriarch, was the very boy who was living, breathing proof of their greatest, cruelest, and most shameful secret. The power dynamic in the room had not just been inverted, it had been obliterated. They were no longer in a position to demand, to expect, to judge. They were supplicants. They were beggars at the court of the daughter they had cast out, pleading for a miracle from the grandson they had never known. Leo, who had been standing silently beside me through all of this, his young face a mask of quiet comprehension, finally spoke. He didn't look at them, at the strangers who were his grandparents, his uncle. He just looked up at me. "So practice," he said, his voice full of a quiet, steady strength that made my heart ache with pride. What do we do now, Mom? And I looked at my family, at their shocked, shattered, and utterly defeated faces. For the first time in 15 years, they were looking at me, not with judgment, not with pity, but with a new, terrified respect. They were finally seeing my strength, and they were finally, truly, facing the consequences of it. The decision was no longer theirs to make, it was ours. Leo's simple, honest question. What do we do now? Mom hung in the silent, emotionally devastated living room. It was a question aimed at me, but it was a verdict for them. It was a quiet, powerful declaration that the decision-making, the future of this broken family, no longer rested with the patriarch in the armchair. It rested with me, the daughter he had thrown away, and the grandson he had never known. I looked at my family, at their 3 shocked, shattered faces. That, I said, my voice calm and steady, is a very good question. What do we do now? I turned to my son and put my hands on his shoulders. First, I said, speaking to my family but looking only at him. This is not your burden to carry. Leo, this is not your responsibility. You owe these people nothing. Do you understand me? Absolutely nothing. He just nodded, his eyes full of a quiet, fierce loyalty that made my heart ache with pride. I need to speak with my son, I said to the room, my voice leaving no room for argument. Alone. I led Leo into my kitchen and closed the door, leaving my family to sit in the wreckage of their own making. I knelt in front of him, taking his hands in mine. Leo, honey, I began, my voice soft. You heard them. Your grandfather is very sick. And there is a chance, a small chance, that you could help him, that you could save his life. I took a deep breath. But you don't have to. You don't have to do anything. Your body, your choice, always what they did to us, to me, was unforgivable, and you owe them nothing. He was quiet for a long moment, his young face serious and thoughtful. He kicked you out because of me, he said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact he was finally, fully understanding. Yes, I whispered. He looked past me, through the kitchen door, at the 3 broken figures in the living room. He's your dad, Mom, he said quietly. And he's dying. He looked back at me, his gaze firm and clear. If I can help, I want to do it for you. The tears that had been threatening all day finally came. But this time, they were tears of overwhelming love and pride for the incredible young man I had raised. He was so much better than all of them. We walked back into the living room, a united team of 2. They all looked up at us, their faces full of a desperate, pleading hope. Leo has made his decision, I announced. He is willing to be tested, and if he is a match, he is willing to be a donor. A wave of profound, audible relief went through the room. My mother started to sob, her hand flying to her chest. But, I said, my voice as hard as steel, cutting through their relief. It will be on our terms, and they are absolute and non-negotiable. They all just nodded, their eyes fixed on me. They were ready to agree to anything. First, I began. The truth. The lies are over. You will tell the entire family, every aunt, every uncle, every cousin you have spent the last 15 years lying to the truth. You will tell them why I left. You will tell them about Leo, and you will apologize, not just to me, but to him, for denying his existence, for treating him like a shameful secret. Second, I continued, a real relationship, if you want to be in our lives. You will be in them for real. You will not just see Leo as a donor, a means to an end. You will be his grandparents, his uncle. You will come to his robotics competitions. You will ask him about his life. You will make an effort to know the incredible young man you have missed out on for 15 years. And third, I said, my voice dropping, my gaze sweeping over all of them. Respect. You will respect me, as a mother, as a successful woman, as the head of my own family. The pity, the condescension, the judgment, it is over. Today, if you ever, for 1 second, make me or my son feel less than again, we are gone, for good. And there will be no second chances. I looked at them, at the family who had cast me out. That is the price for this gift. That is the only way forward. Do we have a deal? My father, his face streaked with tears, just nodded, unable to speak. My mother and my brother followed suit. Their agreement a quiet, humbled whisper. Leo was a perfect match. Of course he was, the transplant. 2 months later was a grueling ordeal, but it was a success. My father, with a kidney from the grandson he never knew, was given a second chance at life. Our family was given a second chance. 2. It's not a fairy tale. The wounds of the past are still there, pale scars that will likely never fade completely. The relationship is awkward, fragile, and requires constant, careful work, but it is, for the first time, honest. My parents are trying. They are making a real, genuine effort to know Leo, to be the grandparents he never had. They come to his robotics competitions, their faces full of a new, genuine pride. My father and I are talking again, really talking, for the first time in 15 years. The respect he now shows me is a gift I never thought I would receive. My father threw me out of his house for a secret he thought would bring him shame, and 15 years later, that same secret came back and saved his life. I learned that strength isn't about pride or control. It is about love and compassion and the quiet, stubborn courage to build a new life from the wreckage of the old. The loser my father cast out ended up being his savior, and the shameful secret he couldn't bear to face became the grandson who gave him a future.